Well, that's no good. I guess I know what's going on YouTube this week. Hello everyone, I'm Richard, this is Lap the World, and I welcome you back to the absolute soap opera that my off-season maintenance schedule has turned into. Seems like every time that I kind of start to get into fixing something, I find something else that really should probably be addressed. Now, those of you familiar with my 1992 Acura NSX and know that it has 288,000 miles on it may not be shocked by this revelation. However, given the general level of care and maintenance I have kind of, I won't say lavished on the car over the years, but the attention has been paid to most of the critical systems to keep this car in good nick, and especially more recently when I've had, more means to do so. But what I discovered this time was while I was in there replacing the last few coolant hoses around the throttle body area, I noticed this little guy kind of dangling from the throttle cable when I took that loose to remove the throttle body, and I had to do some digging because I didn't recognize what it was. It was just a loose little ferrule on the cable. It's in two pieces here because I cut it off. But after some digging and some helpful photos from the community, I was able to identify this as just the piece that keeps the rubber bellows attached to the hose. So it's just kind of there to smush the rubber end around the cable a little better to prevent water and crud from getting back upstream and into the actual guideway of the throttle cable, where it could create serious problems with rust or corrosion. But unfortunately, by virtue of it having come loose, again, I don't know how that happened, but it happened, and it got pinched, I think, between the cable and the pulley on the throttle body, and that has then created a wear point that has started to compromise some of the outer windings of the throttle cable. And that's a little bit of a problem because, as some of you may know, the original, or the factory part throttle cables for the early NSXs have been discontinued. They are unobtainium. You cannot get a new from the factory throttle cable for an early NSX. Certainly, at least not in the American market. If some dealer or supplier has some laying around somewhere else in the world, I do not know of them. However, there are options to deal with this. I'll just go ahead and hit these off the top rather than putting them in the middle of the video and making you dig for them. You can either replace the literal cable itself inside the factory sheath, which is kind of your traditional throttle cable repair technique, I guess, in a pinch. Probably something you could do in the field. Or AS Motorsports out of the Netherlands makes an exact reproduction throttle cable that should match the original part from a length, specification, and fitment standpoint. So that's the direction I've actually gone. I have the cable from AS Motorsports. We'll unbox that here in just a second. But I will also discuss the alternative technique because my plan is to, although I'm going to replace with the basically the replica part, which I think also replaces the sheath. It also replaces the guide as well as the literal cable itself that goes inside it. I'm also going to take measurements when I have things apart and then make sure that I have an appropriate length of just cable that I can carry with me in the car as a spare were that to happen, because looking and reading around in the NSX Prime forums, I'm certainly not the first person to experience some degradation of the throttle cable. I've seen several last few years posts where people have had to replace their throttle cable because it's just snapped somewhere in the middle of the middle of the guideway or near the pedal or near the near the throttle body. The pedal box and the throttle body are where it would be potentially exposed to some elements in water. So that those failure points kind of make sense. But we'll discuss that as we get further into the video. For now though, let's go jump into the actual work required to change out a throttle cable. So let's see what it is that we've received from AS Motorsports in the Netherlands. I'm going to spring too enthusiastically out. Okay. We've got an invoice, which I'll probably have to blur that out. And then packing material, and one throttle cable. So I believe, if I'm looking at this correctly, I think this is the throttle body end, and this is the pedal assembly end. So I'm not sure where this bellows actually goes, but again, I'm going to kind of confirm that I have everything. Any other hardware, I'm told that you reuse from your existing installation. So literally what comes in the package is a sheathed cable that, yeah, seems to move just fine. Push and pull, great. It's obviously it'll be different once you have it tensioned on both ends. Looks pretty straightforward. We'll see how it fits. Having not done this operation before and opting to do the full replacement method of changing the throttle cable, I first needed to figure out how it routed through the car. Now the shop manual, normally a great source of truth and how to do everything, is not really very forthcoming with how to replace a throttle cable. It shows you the general shape of its routing, but it doesn't actually get into detail with where it penetrates bulkheads and so on. So tracing it, we can start here with the offending end that would connect to the throttle body and kind of follow it up over this manifold cover, or rather the plenum cover, and over to the other side of the engine bay. From here, we can follow it around in the engine compartment where it eventually penetrates the firewall into the cabin. And so to go much further with tracing the throttle cable, we are going to have to remove at least part of our interior. Fortunately, with the magic of YouTube, that's easy, and we can now continue tracing our throttle cable. So having removed the passenger seat and all of the trim panels behind the passenger seat, we can look behind this bank of connectors to the left of the ECU and see where the throttle cable comes through the firewall first. We can then follow it out from behind the bank of connectors in front of the ECU, down behind where the rear center channel speaker would be connected, down here into the passenger side next to the tunnel. We'll route down this way, up over here, and we'll eventually disappear back under the dashboard and over to the driver's side to the pedal box. At which point it connects to the pedal assembly, and there is another crank and pulley up there, as well as a few return springs and a lot of dust. With respect to getting access to that footwell, I just went ahead and made the decision to remove the driver's seat. I think the 5 bolts and 1 wiring connector is more than a fair trade against the contortionist act that you'd otherwise have to do to get down there with any kind of dexterity. I also removed this piece of carpet that goes next to the tunnel. One trick on these, they are affixed, which will give you a headache. They are affixed with these little tabs, but these have this little, this odd shape to them for a reason. So if you kind of mush the carpet in when it's on the tunnel, then you can pop this little tab thing off of its screw and then pull it down and be able to remove the carpet without having to remove your entire console to do so. Now, where in the engine compartment there is a kind of a double nut assembly that holds the throttle cable in position near the throttle body, on the pedal assembly, it's actually just held in place by this spring clip. Unfortunately, this spring clip was the biggest pain in the rear to remove. I kind of ended up just using the top jaw of a pair of adjusting pliers. So I adjusted them all the way out. Right. I adjusted it all the way out where I could have this angle at the top and use that to kind of hook onto it and pop it off. Because otherwise you do need something that has an angle, because as you can see, it is well up in there, the thing you're trying to get to. Let me see if I can. So it sits on top of that little bracket, and is nearly impossible to get any access to. You can see I removed my knee bolster and the underdash trim just so I could, probably less for hand access and more so I could see what I was doing. You know, thankfully, thanks to Euro Boutique again, so that I didn't have to worry about my knee bolster exploding with the new carbon fiber piece there. But yeah, that's what we're doing. So then the next part of this is going to be, I'm going to work from the front to the back. So I'm going to remove or disconnect it from the pedal assembly, kind of decouple it from all of its retainers on the interior. And I'm going to try and do this as gracefully as possible. We'll see if that meets with any success. So having now liberated the throttle cable from all of the interior fastening points, we can move on to the engine bay. But first, I will make a note that some of these clips here are fairly stubborn. I was very careful and kept all of them intact. Of note, there are fastening points for the cable behind this bracket. You can see a little tab right there. And underneath these wiring harnesses or wiring connector areas, there's also a fastening point back in there that you need to make sure are loose. Now in the engine compartment, we will start our festivities here by removing this intake manifold cover, and that should let us get us access to the last couple of points where the throttle cable is fastened in the engine bay. And then we will see how we can remove it by hopefully gracefully threading it through the bulkhead. With the manifold cover garnish and the manifold cover itself removed, it was a simple operation of removing this from about one additional little retaining clip and then undoing or loosening up, I guess, the adjustment nuts and removing it from its kind of final stop down there. Now then, our next final step here, to removing it at least, will be to thread it back through the bulkhead down here, which involves a grommet. Now, one thing I am going to note is that you do have to pull from the outside in, because on this end, you just have these adjustment nuts, whereas on the other end, you have this big flange that cannot be separated from the cable sheath. So the hole may be big enough in the firewall to get that through, but I'm not going to count on it, and it would certainly not be easy. So my plan then is going to dip into the bag of tricks used to do the coolant hoses very recently. And I'm going to coat the outside of the cable here up a little ways and the grommet there as much as I can with some silicone to hopefully ease the passage of the cable through the firewall and hopefully not take the grommet with it. Because grommets, from my experience, especially ones that are potentially old, are a pain in the butt to get back in position. So we'll see how that plays out. So having removed the old cable from the car, it's now time to put the new cable in. Now to do that, it should just be the reverse of disassembly. Although I have one step that comes before that, I'm going to go and get a new grommet. The grommet that's in the firewall around the throttle cable, you may have noticed it pulled out with the cable. That's because there's a little bit of extra heat shielding over the cable that I didn't notice in the engine bay portion, which makes sense. But it's a little thicker than the rest of the sheathing in the cable, and so it kind of caught on the grommet and pulled it off the firewall. I was trying to avoid that, but it is what it is. Instead of fighting that one tooth and nail to get it off of the old throttle cable sheathing though, I'm just going to get the new grommet, put the new grommet on the new cable sheathing, and then put the whole thing in as a unit. Again, you're going to want to go from the inside out when you're reinstalling, but it should be straightforward other than that. If you've gotten as far as you have to remove the old cable, then you're going to have a pretty good idea of how to go back in with it. Now I do have plans for my old cable because Right now, there are no new cables available from Honda Acura, and there is only one place in the world right now that I could find that makes a direct replacement cable. That is AS Motorsports in the Netherlands. I've linked them in the description down below. But you never know what's going to happen. I wish them the best, but there could be a situation where, they're not in business sometime in the distant future, or, they decide to discontinue it because nobody's buying them, or there is some global shenanigans that happen that really slow down or halt the flow of goods and services from overseas into the country. I don't know what could possibly cause that. Bless you, 2020. Anyway, yeah, so just as a side note, what I'm going to do with the old cable is I'm going to keep it and I'm going to rebuild it. So I'm going to pull the old wire out and replace it with a new wire and put new ends on it. If you want to do that yourself, or if you're looking to do the fishing method of replacement, where you're just pulling the wire out and then fishing a new section of wire through at the same time, it's critical. Those are the same step. If you're going to fish it through, don't pull the old one out until you have the new one attached to it. Otherwise, you're not going to have any fun then. You will need about 12 feet 3 5/8 inches of cable. You'll probably want more than that. That you can then trim down to that length, but I measured both of the cables, both to make sure that they were the same length. I wasn't installing one that was shorter or longer, but also to get that measurement so I would have it to order replacement wire that I can then put into the old sheathing and then kind of, clean that off and seal it away somewhere for the hopefully really distant future when I ever have to do this again, or if I ever have to do it again. So that's my plan there. Otherwise, I'm going to continue on with this. I'm having kind of debates. You may see a poll in my community section, not trying to cheese the algorithm, but kind of a serious opinion poll with my kind of continued debate. I think I've settled on doing the timing belt water pump job myself. So I really just need to get a timing belt, because I was anticipating the shop I was going to take it to just having a timing belt kind of on hand. Because I don't think those are very hard to come by, but the water pump was unobtainium. I had to get that from, again, big thanks to Mita Motorsports in Japan. Mark, if you're out there, I do appreciate it. The only place I could find a factory water pump as of mid-January 2021. Hopefully, as the pandemic kind of dies down and Japan starts shipping things a little more regularly via airmail, then the part supply will open back up in the US. But until then, Mark, be your man if you can't find it from a vendor that's on shore. So with that in mind, though, I thank you for watching. Hopefully you found this video informative, if not entertaining, as usual. And I'm going to probably call my local Harper Acura tomorrow and see if I can order the grommet and timing belt at the same time. And then we'll continue on and hopefully be back on track sooner than later. But until that happens, as always, I'm Richard. This is Lap of the World, and I will see you all in the next video, if not at the track.